anticipate the Netanyahu side of those conversations. Mr. Birnbaum, you heard, I'm sure, that the Prime Minister spoke 3 times today to President Obama. How would you speculate, having worked closely with this world leader, Mr. Netanyahu, how would you speculate these conversations went?
My guess is they went fairly well. I think Mr. Netanyahu probably laid out in great detail the facts of what happened. Certainly he probably shared with the president certain intelligence reports they had before trying to stop the flotilla. Probably shared with him the fact that the Israeli government for the past week and a half had begged the flotilla not to try and run the blockade, but rather come to Ashdod, have the contents of the cargo checked, and if it was indeed simple humanitarian goods, that they would all be forwarded to Gaza. I think he just explained the facts. The facts of this case, and I welcome the UN resolution for an independent investigation, because I think the facts of this case will be very clear on Israel's side.
1-800-955-1776. The UN resolution today blamed neither Israel nor the Islamist protesters, who were shown on their own broadcast chanting Kedar, Kedar, invoking a Quranic description of a slaughter of Jews by the Prophet Muhammad. Let's go to Larry in Fair Lawn, New Jersey. Larry, you're on the Michael Medved Show with George Birnbaum.
Hi, good afternoon. My concern is that if Israel knew beforehand that this could be trouble, why did they send the soldiers on so seemingly unprepared?
It's a very good question, Larry. There were 6 ships in this flotilla. 5 were boarded the same way the 6th ship had been boarded. In those first 5, there was absolutely no incident whatsoever. In fact, in the Security Cabinet meeting that took place where they were deciding about this operation, actually it was the Forum of 7 meeting, not the Security Cabinet, they believed that the only people they would encounter on these boats would be peace activists. And the first soldiers who went down, who were armed simply with paint guns, believed that they would be encountering peace activists and could have a conversation and encourage them to stop the boats and bring them to the Ashdod port for inspection. And that, in fact, did happen in 5 of the 6 cases. The 6th boat, the one that was sponsored and owned by this terrorist organization, had a different outcome. I think in hindsight, you're probably right, Larry. This maybe could have been handled differently. Maybe they could have sent in the commandos better prepared, maybe a different set of armaments. But again, 5 of the 6 incursions went according to plan. So it's a tough thing to predict, and it's an easy thing to look back and say could have been done differently.
Right. Let's go to Will in Staten Island, New York. You're on the Michael Medved Show with George Birnbaum.
Hi, Mike. How you doing? I have a couple of quick comments. One is, if anybody believes that Israel had no reason to board those ships, I mean, they have to do a little investigation themselves. Secondly, in the state of Israel in foreign policies and the United States basically abandoning them, what do people expect Israel to do? I mean, they have to show some kind of force. Also, besides that, I think people should really, really investigate the true Islam for themselves before they start blaming Israelis and Americans for being anti-Arab or Muslim. Thank you, Mike.
We'll appreciate your comments. Let's go to George Birnbaum.
Well, I agree with everything he said. I couldn't have said it better myself. I think, I do think that Israel had every right to assume that just like in Gaza, these terrorists use civilians as decoys, whether it's for launching rockets or smuggling weapons or anything else. Given the nature of the sponsors of this flotilla, there was every reason to believe that there could be some kind of illegal contraband on these boats, and Israel did do what it had to do to protect its citizens.
And when you say illegal contraband, let's understand that under the laws of war, a state of war exists between Israel and Hamas. I mean, it's a state of war. They've launched, after all, 7,000 rocket attacks on Israeli soil, murdered Israeli civilians with those rocket attacks. There was another attempted incursion from Gaza today. 2 Palestinian militants, would-be terrorists, stopped by the Israelis today. So a state of war exists. As part of a state of war, it is an acceptable tactic of war to initiate a blockade against your enemy. This is something that you can see in all the books of international law. And one of the things that you do in a blockade is it should not and cannot be a blockade of humanitarian supplies. But Israel has not blockaded humanitarian supplies. They have been coming in, I understand, at the rate of 100 trucks per day. Is that right?
I can't confirm the rate. You're probably right. I will say that, yes, I mean, it's not just a state of war. Even in a state of conflict, of armed conflict, the blockade is recognized by international maritime law. And the boarding of ships in international waters for the purpose of protecting that blockade is allowed. So this was not an act of piracy by international maritime law.
But by the way, let's remind people that in the Cuban Missile Crisis of October of 1962, President Kennedy initiated an American blockade of Russian ships bringing supplies to Cuba, with far less basis for that blockade, no?
Absolutely. And I will, even to your point, I don't even think people understand that what Israel allows into the Gaza Strip is not just flour and rice and water. In fact, they allow things like cement, metal pipes, rebar, things that could easily be turned into bunkers and missile launchers and everything else, but they're allowed into Gaza for the purpose of rebuilding infrastructure. So Israel goes beyond what even humanitarian aid would be considered. They're sending in materials that could be easily turned against Israel in an act of violence, if so desired.
Let's go to Dave in Chicago. You're on the Michael Medved Show with George Birnbaum.
Hey, how you doing? I would love to get your guest's opinion on why it seems that American Jews constantly, and I am not at all Jewish either culturally or religiously, but why do they support Democrats in America who seem to be so dismissive of Israel?
George Birnbaum.
I share your frustration. I don't have an answer for you. I think you find that the Jewish population in the United States, by and large, is a liberal population in their social beliefs, and to some degree that translates into their foreign policy beliefs. I don't have an answer for you. In any given election, 75 to 80% of the Jewish population in the United States votes for the Democrat president. That hasn't changed for decades. And there's nothing that appears will cause that to change.
It changed with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan won more Jewish votes than Jimmy Carter did, partially because there was a third-party candidate, John Anderson, who also drew Jewish votes. But I will say, George Birnbaum, that people, there's a whole book on this subject called Why Are Jews Liberal by my friend Norman Podhoretz, and he basically suggests that liberalism has become an alternate religion for too many American Jews. I know that you have to run. I wish we could continue the conversation. We will continue the conversation with listeners. If you think that Israel handled this situation poorly, what should a state do facing the kind of threat that Israel faces? We will be right back with your answers.
Michael Medved Show.